In the multiple studies by political scientists, public opinion pollers, sociologists, and others that studies different social groups, one group that doesn't appear very often is Black girls. Today on Roundtable Perspective, Dr. Ruth Nicole Brown from the University of Illinois discusses with me the unique experiences of Black girls and how it produces a different kind of knowledge and culture that will benefit all of society. Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Lee Artz. I'm joined today by my guest, Dr. Ruth Nicole Brown from the University of Illinois, where she is an Associate Professor of Gender and Women's Studies. I would say you're an academic and an artist.
Absolutely.
And we want to talk about some of your work today, and I'm going to ask you to do most of it, but because I know you've written a couple books. Black Girlhood has a subtitle, Celebration, Hip-Hop Feminist Pedagogy, so we'll talk about that. And Here Are Truths, which is based upon Soul Hot, which we'll also get a chance to talk about. And it's certainly a topic of some urgency today, considering police violence and problems of gender equality that maintain and the larger social inequality. So if we put that in that context, I guess my first question would be, what about Black girlhood, that experience makes it unique that requires both your academics and your artistic approaches to it?
Okay, well, first I want to say thanks for having me on the show. It's an honor to be here and to be in conversation with you. And for me, Black girlhood is the whole wide universe of the unknown. So when I first started researching and studying the experiences of Black girls, I was trained in political science. And in political science, the preferred methodologies are often quantitative. And so we did a lot of stats and talked about comparison groups. And in the previous studies, Black girls were sort of brought into the conversation as a comparison group, not necessarily to understand their experiences, but as a comparison group to understand the experiences of their peer counterparts. So as a researcher, Black girls often came in view through the literature as an adjunct to understanding somebody presumably more important experience.
That would be white men, white women, Black men, and this was a subset?
Yes, absolutely, the comparison to every other group, it seemed. And so I spent a lot of time working with girl empowerment programs, and they were all about girls coming to voice and really teaching girls how to resist certain socialization strategies to give them a voice to increase their power. And I noticed that in that group, even though the goal was to celebrate all girls, the Black girls in those groups were still punished, were often silenced for the very same measures and criteria that the program wanted to promote.
Which was to allow voice? Yes. But if you voiced,
if you were too loud, if you had too much to say, if you were overly opinionated or had an idea even, then you were in trouble. And so I thought, okay, this is an interesting paradox. But it also certainly resonated with my own experience, and also was not necessarily helped out by the academic literature that I was reading in my particular discipline at the time. So I said there ought to be a place for Black girls to be themselves. In real life, in after-school spaces, in school spaces, wherever young people were, but also on the page. I wanted to see and read about Black girls, not as a subset of anyone else's experience, but to really ask questions that I was interested in about power, about politics, from their experiences and from their perspectives. So I thought maybe I could try to flip the script a little bit. Instead of going in and asking them about political concepts, I can ask them if they could redefine the entire field itself, and if I could learn about power and politics from their perspective, not necessarily impose what a discipline had to say about their experiences. So what would one of those early
conversations look like? I'm sure now with those soul hot, which we'll
Yes.
come to shortly. But what would one of those early conversations look like? So if you sit down with a
Yes.
group of black girls and you say, well,
Yes.
what's your experience? I mean, where does that initial voice come from? Because it would be unexpected in a space where you're not expected or allowed even to speak up. Suddenly you have this. How do we know that that's their experience versus their experience that's kind of been informed by everything outside their experience? If that's...
Yeah, no, you hit the nail right on the head. So for me, there is power. I often do a lot of work in school spaces, and I name what I'm doing, Soul Hot, as for Black girls.
Yes.
And that's often one of the first responses I get from the students. For Black girls, this is for us.
Yeah.
We've never seen anything that was unapologetically for
Would
us.
train you how to
So
be assimilate, how to get along and the rest, but not...
just even the name to say this is for Black girls, it's like, what a gift. Like, this is for
we should
us.
say the name, because it's
Soul Hot.
Yes, but that's saving our lives,
Saving our lives,
hear our truth.
hear our truth.
So it
Yeah.
becomes Soul Hot, but
It becomes Soul Hot. That's what we call it. It's
yes.
his nickname. It's
But
an
saving our
acronym.
lives, hear our truth.
Saving our lives, hear our truth.
So the relationship is here between voice and...
Yeah, well, it was just my response to like, there ought to be a place. And when I would bring that critique up to people who were not necessarily as fair or just as they should be, they would ask me, and rightfully so, to point them to somewhere where they could see how it will look. And honestly, as a researcher, I had a hard time, so I thought, let me create it. And so that's how Soul Hot came to be, saving our lives, hear our truths, and it is a space that we name as for Black girls. And that does revolutionary work in and of itself when you're in institutions where there is rarely so much that has your name on it that is not about punishment, but is a place that is affirming and welcoming of all that you bring.
So Soul Hot is an
Soul
enterprise
Hot
of the
is-
University of Illinois, or do you take it on the
no.
road? I mean, is it...
Soul Hot was before the University of
Okay.
Illinois. It will be after. So the way we talk about Soul Hot is really as a movement. It aims to move particular people closer to each other. It moves ideas. It moves arts. It moves culture. So it is a social force.
Is it considered a structure, an agency? I mean, is it a collective?
It's
Does
definitely.
it come into being and then go out of being based
It
upon
does.
the events? I mean, somebody would decide, is there like an address?
Yes.
Or no?
There's no physical building.
Okay.
We really value the relationships and the people. It is a collective group of people laboring on behalf of and with Black girls, always for the purpose of celebration. Now, it can happen after school, it can happen in school, it can happen at the mall. We take it to every place Black girls are and to the places that call for the celebration of Black girlhood.
Which leads to another question, and I know you have books, and if you want to speak to some of them, we'll certainly show the viewers the books that you've written so they can see those. But it leads me to another question, because you said celebration a couple times, and you've also talked about the larger world that like devalues
Yes.
Black girl experience. So what's the relationship between celebration
Yeah.
and what one of the book covers says is create social change? So
Yeah.
how does celebration in and of itself, or is it not
Yes.
in and of itself, that makes social change or cultural change? I mean,
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's one that I think about a lot. It constantly changes. But one of the things that I know from doing Soul Hot and meeting Black girls face to face is that so often, in terms of how they're defined, they're often defined, as I said, as an adjunct, but also often devalued and pointed to for all the ways in which they receive lack or less. And I'm always careful because the critique is solidly important. That the critique is where we must point to say this is unjust, this is not right, this is unfair. And often it's an experience, it's written in policy, and it's enacted by other people as well as interpreted by everybody involved. But for Soul Hot, it was really important for me to consider critique, to engage critique, to listen to the girls' critique, and then to also create. And so we don't just stop with the critique, because one of the dangers, I think, of maybe just only seeing the critique is sort of a deficit-based lens where you don't.
This is unjust. This is unequal.
Yeah. But what do you want?
Yeah.
What do we want when we're together?
And how do we get there?
And how do we get there?
Which is kind of hidden in my question, because yes, I see this. I should be allowed a voice. I should be allowed to express. Okay, I do this. So what's the relationship between that? I mean, I've seen some things that were on Soul Hot, or I don't know how I got there. I saw a couple videos, and the young women, the black girls were, you know, celebrating essentially. But how does that push towards social change, I guess, is the question. Not that celebration always has to, but to what extent does it, and in what ways can it?
Yeah, well, first of all, going in with the idea to celebrate reveals the structures that we're working up against. And so sometimes when we go in and we say we want to celebrate black girls, they say, well, what about the boys? And isn't that an interesting, we can't even get to the celebration. So a lot of what we find out is attempting to get to a space, to create the space of celebration. And then
oftentimes people don't know that they don't have a voice.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I mean, if you have internalized, or if your community or your society has pushed you to be a certain way, sometimes you're very comfortable in that. And to be saying,
we're here
have
to
voice,
celebrate.
It's like, what does that mean?
And often it's not so much that they don't know that they have a voice, but when we get together, because in Soul Hot there are older women, it's an intergenerational space. And so
girls that were in it earlier stay?
We like working with the middle school age population. That is my favorite age group to work with. We also work with high school students. We have college students there. We have anybody there, we say from 4 to sort of 45, 50 is like the group of folks who are always present. But when we work with the black girls we work with in Soul Hot, they know they have a voice. What they don't know is if they can trust us to listen to what they have to say. They can sing it, they can dance it, they can write it, they can rhyme it. They know their preferred way of sharing. What they don't know is if they're in a space where what they have to say will be welcome, will be heard, can we act on it? Do we believe them? Is really what often has to happen before the celebration begins in earnest.
So, again, I don't mean to detract from the power of celebration or finding the voice, but at what point, you believe them, the other people in Soul Hot believe them, they found a space where they're respected and they can act, but at what point does it get where they can say, we not only could, but we should be able to do this outside of Soul Hot?
Yes.
If that's a legitimate
a
question, because it's like the debate over speaking truth to power. I always hate that phrase, because power knows the truth. What we need to do is speak power of truth. And when I think of Soul Hot, I think that there's a power in a different truth. And the question is how to take that power and realize it. That's not necessarily the purpose, but how to realize it outside of spaces like Soul Hot. How do I realize this? Where I don't have to be in Soul Hot to act and be the way I want. If that's a legitimate question?
It's a completely legitimate question, and it makes me think, one, the space of Soul Hot and the celebration is not easy, and we don't always get it right. So I don't want to infer that
you don't have something that we're getting. What do they call them? A learning objective for these students. I know they got an A. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're learning as much about ourselves and the world as the youngest girls are in the group, and so it's a lot of time. It's a lot of relationship building. And we talk about sort of the space of Soul Hot. So we might have a Soul Hot session that starts at 3 and ends at 5:30. And here are truths. One of the chapters that I focus on is a chapter on the homegirls. And we call ourselves homegirls, those who take responsibility for creating the space of celebration. And in talking with them, one of the things that comes out immediately is that they start well before the time we get together. I mean, almost from the time they wake up, getting themselves together to be able to enter the space. And then once, because there is also some things that come up when Black women and Black girls are in conversation with each other that that we also have to address and deal with. That is not easy. And then you're right, So Hot is over. And we release them back into the hallways maybe of the schools, or we're there with them actually when an incident occurs that is not So Hot at all.
Do you see an experience, so the girls that have gone through So Hot have been to several activities, can you witness that they are more confident, more outspoken, more insistent as they go back into the hallways or back into their lives? I mean, that may not be the ultimate purpose, but do you witness that? I mean,
you know, I think in terms of like the fellowships and the grants, they always ask that. They want to see longitudinal data change over time.
Well, they certainly don't want to see black girls speaking
leaders.
up more often.
I mean, right. What would that look like? Trouble for you, which is exactly what we want to make. Yeah. But I think, and that's really actually hard to say. One, I don't track the data in that way to say for sure. But one of the things that I know So Hot does that I'm actually more impressed with is that people who do So Hot have taken it up as a part of their identity, and that's not at all the objective. So when people do So Hot, and then, you know, after year 2, after the 3rd session, they say, Dr. B, I am So Hot. To take that up as a part of your identity is much more sacred and important work to me. People also tell me it's not necessarily sort of the outward measures. I mean, we might not be able to measure. We don't know grades is a common marker for people at that age to measure, like change over time.
I mean, you could measure music and talk about the number of notes and the length of this.
We could talk about that.
But that's not the same as hearing it or responding to it.
That is not. But for people to say this thing has changed my life, I mean, those are the notes that I take and keep close to heart. And I don't know what about it until I ask them, well, what was it? And everybody is so different and diverse and going through so many different things. But certainly people have said that this work has changed their lives. It's changed and transformed my own life. So to me, that's like the ultimate measure of success, if there ever was one.
And linking this with your political science background or even with your current academic position, there's always that pressure to provide a theory, provide a method, to provide some data or some evidence of this. But because one of the questions I was asking, again from the cover of the book, talked about different methods. And so I just wonder if as you're going through this, you're coming up with not a method or a practice that can be written down and then taught in a classroom, but a method or practice that makes us more human or allows the humanity. So I just wonder if you could articulate what that method or what those methods or practices might be that are substantiate the experiences. I mean, are there a few that you could share?
Oh, absolutely. So So Hot is not a formula, but and I've worked with the people that have done So Hot over time to create what it is, and it's different every time. We rely on a lot of musical concepts like improv, like hip hop, like freestyle, the ability to create ciphers. But we have a loose structure is what we call it, and the loose structure is grounded in rituals. So we attempt to open the same way every time. And one of the ways that we open, it's called Just Because. And it's a simple fill in the blank, just because I am, my name is, and I am. Or just because fill in the blank doesn't mean my name is, and I am. And so that fill in the blank we share collectively. And one, it's a way for them to self-define. So we always say, you know, tell us who you want to be called. And to get a Black girl's name right and pronounce it right is a show of solidarity that you're at least present. This is a very first step we take. It
reminds me of classes I have with international students, and often Asian students will introduce themselves as Susie, or and to say, no, we want to call you by your name, and we have to learn to pronounce it.
We have to learn to pronounce it.
It's on us. It's not on you to give up and to assimilate. So we often don't think about that for people that are in the United States, that the same process, often has to take place. So
Absolutely, and sometimes people give us a nickname, which
Yeah, yeah,
also
yeah.
is like that's a handout. Like I'm telling you how I prefer to be called,
yeah.
and you know we have to be aware and stay aware of sort of all the gifts.
I'll keep calling you Dr. Brown, though. So.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And it's also a way for us to sort of recognize the diversity in the group. So we get a lot of just because I am loud, or just because I am quiet, or just because I am shy. So we can recognize the diversity immediately and sort of break down stereotypes. And then often, maybe at its most political, it's a way for girls to express things about themselves that they want us to know, some part of their identity that they hold dear that may be not obvious by looking at them, or other things.
I don't know if there's issues. I mean, I taught middle school in Detroit, so
Okay.
one of the daily occurrences would be the drama, often between black girls. And I wonder, how do you deal with something like that? Because that's certainly part of the experience and part of getting, I would argue, power and dignity and respect would be being able to have, not have arguments, but to have them in such a way where we can get through this and find a solution to whatever the problem we're dealing with. So
Absolutely.
is that
That's
just...
a part of it. And you mentioned Detroit, so I have to shout out Grace Lee Boggs.
Oh, goodness.
I studied with Grace Lee Boggs as a part of the Detroit Summer Program when I was a graduate student at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And so much what I learned about the power of revolution, the power of people coming together, I learned through Detroit Summer and those conversations of listening to. I was listening to Grace Lee Boggs and took it to heart. For sure, that gave me the belief that I could even start something like Soul Hut. And so you mentioned the drama. When we were in a school in Chicago just this past spring, and whenever I go to particularly a new school or a new space, I'm always asking, like, what are the top 3 issues for black girls at your school? And at this school in Chicago, drama was the #1 issue, they said. Drama is the number. I'm like, well, what kind of drama is it? And then also as someone who studies theater, I'm really interested in drama as heightened action. Yes. Who are the actors? Who has the power? Who's the heroine? Who's not? Let's get the story. And so when we engage it like that, it kind of falls apart in terms of like, well, there's an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or actually, we thought it was an issue, but when you said it, it's not really a big deal, at all. So it was a happening. It was an event. And a lot of the drama that they have, that's also one of those code words that they use to give critique. Because it's like, okay, well, what is the issue? Well, it could be a particular person at the school, or actually something that one of the students is experiencing that maybe they want help to be able to give some names to it, words to, and help maybe even for that student. So.
Well, we could talk a while, this conversation. It kind of slips away from us
It
in our
does.
short time. But I just maybe very briefly at the end, I would like to bring this back to the larger society.
Yeah.
And racist inequality, poverty, police actions, the entire society. So how do you see the link between this, like the link between the African Blood Brotherhood or the Nation of Islam or Republic of New Africa? They had some vision. Is there a connection here, especially when you say Grace Lee Boggs? It kind of leads me, and we don't have a lot of time, but maybe a minute.
Yeah, in a minute, really quick.
Yes.
Well, I believe that black girls hold the answer to so many important questions. If we take the time to ask them, listen, and then act on behalf of what they know, this world will sincerely be a better place. We will all, I think, be more human, not at their expense, but because of what they know and because of everything they deserve. And so for me, it is connected to a larger social justice vision of who we all, I think, are wanting to be.
I heard on the radio today where they talked about artists, academics, and activists, and they came up with the word artivist.
Yes. Yes.
And Soul Hut seems to me as a place of creating artivity, I guess.
Yes.
And I would hope that some of our viewers look up Soul Hut and find it, because I was able to find some videos which actually allowed. We can't recreate that here in our conversation, but to see the performance and its link with music and rhyming and the rest kind of gives an idea that there's an energy there. There's some potential for the future. So
We Levitate is the name of Soul Hot's band. We make music, we make rhymes, we make beats, and we create art that reflects the world that we want to live in.
Well, Dr. Brown, you've been doing some work for a long time, since Here Are Truths and Soul Hot and articles, and I understand there's a new book coming out, Poem Theory and Politics, and you would like to share with us some readings from the work, and well, let's take that time now.
Thank you. The thing to do away with are the conditions that got the wrong person calling on you. Woman who called police on black girls selling water insists she's not racist. Redefine, re-semanticize, reimagine what is called for. Meanwhile, babies are birthed and children are raised. Pointed to for getting over, I did not know it was love. Amateurs, superstars, independent artists, promising failures, beauty supplied dreamers levitate. People who are and are not black girls, artists, whose craft show you their study of black girlhoodness, are telling us something new about an old story of radical imagination, which includes a kind of liberation we always attribute to someone else. We so busy calling, we don't answer to who is calling us closer. Something absolutely Southside and surrounding land area water teaches the power of art and heightens the art of power.
Thank you for that. That's all the time we have on our program. Thank you, Dr. Ruth Nicole Brown, for joining me today on Roundtable Perspective. I'm Lee Artz. See you next time.